the way this worked, by the way, is that there were a number of these big trucks, like these kind of 18-wheelers you may see in the United States or so, or sometimes there's these big boxes on the back of a big hauling truck, and that's what a lot of these were. And I think Gary has a few images of some of those trucks. What they did is they drove them into certain areas inside of Russia, and then they parked them near one of the air bases. Now, what's being reported so far, interestingly enough, is that the guys who were driving were simply contract drivers. They had no idea what they were hauling. They didn't even know what was going on. Apparently, at least in one case, they were told, park in this certain location and someone would come meet you or something like that. Then from apparently somewhere in Ukraine, maybe in Kiev, remotely through satellite links, then the drones were activated, which in all likelihood, it could either mean that they had some kind of redundant link to be able to link to a drone operator from somewhere else through a satellite, or they had some kind of AI configuration to where all they had to do was launch the drones, and then the drone itself, because they had done such reconnaissance and they knew where the bombers were located, that it went up and then it was able to identify where it was, and then it would go and attack the planes. So either way you want to talk it was amazingly spectacular. Interesting also, that at least there are some anecdotal reports coming out of Russia that in some of the places, some of the people, the Russian people actually saw these trucks and recognized what was going on, climbed up on the trucks and started destroying the drones before they even got out. So that's one of the trucks right there. That's what I'm talking about, these kind of trucks. And so you see there was a drone literally coming out of the top of it right there. So you can see how, how these things were launched. Apparently that was going on all over the place. These things take off to go in toward their targets, etc. And you can see the smoke in the background from that video image right there. There were, so far as what's being reported by the Russian media, there were 5 air bases that were attacked in this manner. One at Murmansk, one at Irkutsk, one at Ivanovo, Ryazan, and Amur. The Russians said that the attacks were repulsed at 3 of the bases, Ivanovo, Ryazan, and Amur region. Those apparently did not have any targets struck. You can see that map on the screen right there where a lot of these were. Literally, these things are all over the map in Russia. I mean, you're talking thousands of miles from the front lines. So that's how a lot of these happen. Now that you see that in the middle of the screen there where it says Irkutsk, what we evidence is so far is coming in is at least on one of the targets there that there was a truck that went inside Russia, and then it was loaded up and prepared inside Russia. So apparently when the truck itself came across the border, it was not loaded up. But then obviously then because of this 18-month preparation, apparently the Ukraine side was able to stockpile some of the drones themselves, the facilities that needed to do it, because they put this basically on the top of those trucks that you saw a minute ago. So even inside the truck, you wouldn't see anything, but apparently up in the roof, there was an image or a cavern where all the drones. I don't know if we have any of those screenshots. I've seen a number of pictures where you could see how those drones were actually launched in there, so that once the tops of those trucks opened up, then they were able to fly out like that. So any way you want to look at it, this was a pretty remarkable operation. But at the end, we're getting into the issue here of what is the significance of it. Now, many in Russia are calling this their Pearl Harbor moment, because they view this as you came out of nowhere, you hit us with all this stuff, and because, like I said a minute earlier, don't want to forget this, in addition to the airfields that were hit, because that's what's getting all the main print in the Western media especially, but there were also 2 separate rail incidents in the southern part of Russia, not too far from one was in the Bryansk area, that's one right there that you see. The other one was in the Kursk area. And in this particular one here, as I understand it, the train was going down the track and the bridge fell on top of it, which derailed it. And at the moment, they said there are 7 people killed and quite a number of others wounded. Now, bear in mind, this was a passenger train. This was not a military train. And so that's one of the things that certainly is making the Russian side really angry, and why they're calling this a Pearl Harbor moment. They're saying this wasn't even a military train, a military transport. It was just a civilian passenger thing. So the bridge was clearly timed to drop so that it fell on top of the train as it came through. In the other occasion, in the other place in the Kursk area, apparently that's the other one there. The train was on the bridge, and the bridge was taken out while the train was going across it. I actually don't have any knowledge at this point. I haven't been able to research it to find out, was that a military train, or was it also a passenger train? That I'm not sure about. I'll have to check into that. Hopefully we can get that to you in the morning. But these damage here, these are causing some problems for the Russians at the front. This is one of the successes that the Ukraine side has had, because a lot of these rail lines here are used to reinforce the Russians on their offensive, especially in the Sumy area and along the northern front, partially also in the Kursk, the Kharkiv area where the Russians are attacking in there. But listen, you got to understand, again, just before I came on air here, I was looking at some of the Russian media, and there's already images of people, some just regular people helping out, to the officials. They're already starting to clear the rubble, and they're going to try and repair these bridges. And, especially when you get into wartime, folks, when you're motivated, you may recall during World War II, especially in the Germans, we kept bombing bridges all the time. Or in Vietnam, we would bomb bridges. Korea, we would bomb bridges, knock them out, and then they would figure out how to get them up within days to have them function. You don't have to get it perfect like you will in a civilian time here, but if they need to, they can get this stuff repaired rather rapidly. So I think this is going to be a temporary success for the Ukraine side. It may slow down the Russians, but of course they have plenty of logistics already on the front line there, so it's not going to run out, and there are alternative means. But it's going to make it a lot more complicated in the south there. But all this together has made a lot of Russians angry. Some of the anger, I'll point out, is actually at the Russians themselves. I've seen a lot of comments on some of the Russian social media that they've said, hey, props to the Ukraine side. They caught us with their pants down. We were not prepared for this. The sophistication that was involved with both with technologically, with how this system operated, the secrecy that it got in there. Nobody was able to talk about it, and it had significant damage to our bomber forces in the north. So they give props to that. Then some of the anger is turned toward the Russians, because they're saying, how could we not be ready for this? We know that the danger of drones, we know that this is possible. And for many times, there's been long-range drones struck throughout Russia. So this is not the first time that a deep strike inside Russia has been successful. There have been, you may recall, several months ago, we showed you there was actually a whole series of oil facilities and oil refineries inside Russia that were hit by drones that got through. So you would think, especially your strategic nuclear bomber force, that you recognize that that's a high-value target for the enemy. Because a lot of these are also, it's not just nuclear weapons they fire, they're also firing a lot of these long-range weapons and cruise missiles that have been firing into Ukraine. So they know that that's going to be a high priority target. And a lot of the questions are, I think, pretty valid. Why didn't you have, drone defenses set up? Why don't you have the netting that you may see on some of the front lines here? I've shown you and talked to you about how some of the logistic lines that actually both sides use now, they have these literally massive nets, fishing nets or other kinds of nets that they will almost have a tunnel of in the resupply locations in the tactical area, so that the FPV drones can't fly through and hit the trucks. Or if they do, they blow up in the netting, not on the truck here. And people are asking, why didn't you do that with our bomber forces? Now, apparently all the news isn't bad from the Russian side, because at least from what they're claiming, 3 of the airfields that were attacked did not succeed. So they were able to stop some of those from hitting. So it's not all bad, but the Russians aren't happy about that. But the rest of the Russian anger, the majority of it, is actually focused on the Ukraine side, because they said, okay, and some of the op-eds that I saw, or one of the op-eds that I saw just before we came on air here, it said, this is it. We shouldn't even do any diplomacy anymore. We've reached out a hand that we've been willing to consider a diplomatic end to this, that he didn't use the term, but the ones I use, ugly terms, but it's a negotiated settlement that would end the fighting. And instead, Ukraine does this. And so they're saying, all right, when we meet together in Istanbul, and by the way, both parties have gone. The Umarov is leading the delegation from the Ukraine side. Apparently, he's already on set. Medinsky is leading the Russian delegation. Gary actually has some video of him on site.
Скажите, пожалуйста, как удары по российской территории? Вы видели условия, которые
Все видел, все знаю, все завтра.
So you see there, he's on site, and of course, the first question everybody's going to be asking him, because that's where all the Western cameras are, is what do you think about these strikes and what are you going to do? And he's basically waving them off, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. He mentioned a memorandum there. There has been some debate going back and forth and aggravation on the two sides. Russia said because of the first meeting they had in Istanbul between the two sides a couple of weeks ago, they agreed that they would give each side a memorandum that listed basically a term sheet. This is our entry-level terms for what we want. This is what the Ukraine side would give, and then they said they would exchange them. Well, for some reason, and I don't know if it was agreed to or not, and Russia changed it, but the Ukraine side believed that Russia would give it to them before the meeting. But Russia said, and they were clear about this before, they said, we will give you the memorandum at the meeting. That's the point, in their view, of the working level meeting, whereas apparently the Ukraine side already gave their call sheet to at least the United States. And Russia hasn't given it to anyone, and Medinsky still hasn't. The media that I looked at just before coming on air again, they reiterated that they're not sharing that with anyone. It's not even in the Russian media. They're not sharing what it is, but I don't think it's very hard to figure out what it is, because Russia's been pretty consistent in what they've been looking for from the outset. Now, the question is going to be, what is going to happen as a result of this? How will all of these actions impact what the negotiating teams are going to say? Potentially, one reason they aren't saying anything about the memorandum now is because maybe they'll change it before tomorrow. Because one of the things the Russians have been saying of late is that what was going to be in this memorandum is going to be the harshest terms that there's been offered to date, with the caveat that if these diplomatic offers aren't taken, then the next time, if there is a next time, it's going to be worse. Now, you saw, if you watched our shows last week, and again, but we ask you to subscribe to our channel if you're new to us here, because you get stuff like this as it's breaking. We give you this kind of information here that, frankly, almost no other Western outlets are producing, and we do this all the time. We got the great team here with Gary Villapiano behind the camera and in the research department. And what they have said is that what Medvedev said in one of our shows last week is this is the last chance. He said it actually, he was interviewed, not interviewed, but he was given a speech in front of a legal forum. And he said, this is the last chance for peace right here. You had Nebenzia, Ambassador Nebenzia at the United Nations Security Council just a few days ago said that this is it. This is the chance for negotiated settlement. And if we don't get our terms at the negotiated settlement, then it's going to be won on the battlefield. He just straight up said it. That's not an interpretation. That's not he kind of meant. He expressly said, we will win on the battlefield. So we already knew where Russia's head was heading into this. So then you got to think about the Ukraine side. If they're doing any kind of rational cost analysis, cost benefit analysis, looking at the balance of power between the two sides, you know, who's got the most manpower, ammunition, aircraft, air defense, intel, all those things, then obviously it's off the chart. Russia's way up in the top, Ukraine's way down on the bottom. Anyone can do this kind of an assessment if you have any intelligence at all. Doesn't take hard. So if you know where the Russians are diplomatically heading into this, then what would be the benefit to you to have this high profile strike on the eve of the next direct discussions? I mean, is there some kind of, I don't know, psychosis or just detachment from reality that, like that analyst on France 24 there, where you think that this is going to send a message that is going to make the Russians back down? I mean, that would be irrational, especially for anybody in Ukraine. Nobody knows the Russians better than the Ukrainians, certainly better than anybody in the West. I mean, they were part of the Soviet Union together. They've been fighting in one form or another since 2014, et cetera. So there shouldn't be any doubt about what the Russians believe and what they think and what they're capable of. Look, you just got to say it. I can't get into anybody's mind. I don't have any access to behind the scenes of anybody anywhere. But just looking at this situation here, because of the knowns, the things that we know about, what Russia is overtly saying, and what we can physically count with the balance of power, et cetera, that if you were willing, if you wanted to have peace, if you wanted the war to come to an end and you knew you couldn't win militarily, then you would calm things down. Remember, all these strikes, by the way, that President Trump talked about, he was so angry about last week, coming from Russia against Kiev, well, he either wasn't aware or I don't know. Just disregard it. I don't know. But those drone strikes were going back and forth between the capitals. Both sides were doing it for many, many days in a row. There was hundreds going in one direction, hundreds going in the other. The war was ongoing. If you want to end the war, and you realize now after closing in on 3.5 years of fighting that you can't even stop Russia, and there's no chance that you could ever push them back. So then you want to say, all right, well, what's the best we can get out of this? Let's get a negotiated settlement, keep as much terrain as we can, and preserve as much of our own freedom and independence as we can, so that we can rebuild and have some sort of a life. That's what a rational person would do. But if you didn't want the war to come to an end, if you actually wanted it to continue on, then in light of the known balance of power imbalance between the two, then you would do some kind of a high profile thing that would be intended to spawn a bigger reaction on the Russian side. And look, the evidence is there. The strikes did happen. They were planned for a long time. They were clearly connected with those two train strikes on top of it. And look, I think that it's pretty clear that the Russians are not going to take this lying down, because they have the power to do something about it. And I think that what may come out is that Russia, this meeting tomorrow, I think it's not out of the realm of the possibility that they instead of giving them a memorandum, they may give them an ultimatum. They may say, this is your final chance here. You either submit to the terms on this sheet, or the next thing is going to be, we're going to have a meeting at the presidential palace in Kiev, and we're going to physically show up with our army. That's what could happen. It's entirely within the character of Russia to do that. They have done it before. And that in the Second World War, there came a point. I think I perceive and I calculate that it was really the Battle of Kursk in 1943 which tipped the scales irrevocably against the Germans. At that point, from that point forward, there was no going back. And then you had the Potsdam Congress, and the West, or the Allies altogether. It wasn't just the West, because it included the Soviet Union at that time. They said, now we're just going on to full victory. That's all there's going to be. We're just going to go for unreserved surrender for the German side. That's what they were going to go after here. And then they did. And then they went all the way through, and the Battle of Bagration was the kind of the last throw to it. And there's many in Russia who want exactly that kind of strategy now. So if the West and Ukraine were actually trying to get this done to where they wanted to say, hey, we want the war to continue, because maybe in the mind of some, and we've had some on our show who speculate that there are those in Europe that actually want to drag this out, because they don't want to have the Trump version where there's a negotiated settlement and the war gets off the table, and the two sides settle and basically Russia wins. They don't want that. So they wanted to drag out the war until Trump leaves, and then hope that they get a Democrat on the other side that'll go back to the Biden way. That's what is, according to some sources that we've had on our show here, say about the European side. If that's what they think, and if Zelensky is in league with that, and they think, yeah, that's the best case, all we got to do is just stay alive. We just have to avoid defeat. And then later on, I don't think there'll be a later on, folks, because there's no evidence that President Trump is going to say, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go in. I'm going to facilitate that. And because for that to happen, Trump has to reverse course and say, all right, I'm going to support Ukraine. We're going to go back to the Biden era times, because that's what you'd have to have. You'd have to have all the ammunition that we can provide, a replacement for almost all the howitzers, many more than 31 M1 tanks, and then a whole bunch more Stryker vehicles and Bradley fighting vehicles, all kinds of things. You'd have to go back to large scale investment, and obviously air defense missiles, Patriots, etc. All those things would have to go back in to even theoretically be able to say we're going to go on to fighting for years to try to get to another one. And Trump shows no evidence that he's willing to do that. You saw the Secretary of State in Senate testimony about a week and a half ago. He said, hey, folks, we don't have those kind of air defense capacities. We don't have any more Patriots to give, and we're not going to. So there shouldn't be any delusion on that side. But again, I'm just telling you, I'm just assessing what we see, what we can count, and what we know. And the evidence is really starting to look like that there is some delusion so far detached from reality that they are willing to take steps to make sure that Russia doesn't achieve a ceasefire, that Russia doesn't end.
Mr. President, such a pleasure.
So we're just going to have to wait and see how this unfolds. But I think some of the next thing here is that we're going to find out what President Putin decides to do. I mean, we'll see maybe as early as tomorrow about this diplomacy thing, whether there's an ultimatum given or not. And then many are saying, hey, well, there's a reason why Russia tested that Oreshnik missile several months ago, and they've been producing them quite a lot in between now and then. So some say that may be the next time, because since this strategic targets were hit in Russia and they were big and painful, that there's going to be a big and painful strike in retaliation. Some are suggesting it won't be a tit for tat, which is kind of common in the Russian viewpoint, where they've done that diplomatically a lot, but that it will be like a 3x for a 1x. So whatever happened to the Russian side because of this Ukrainian attack could be threefold in retaliation on some big important strategic target. And lest people think and buy into some of these Western commentators that the Russian side hasn't done a lot of these things because they can't. They haven't advanced any faster and farther than they have because they can't. All the targets that they've attacked, that's the best they can do. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that these are very carefully calculated decisions on the Russian side to minimize casualties on the Ukraine side, to maximize military significant strikes, but they have left things out, like the power ministries in Kiev. They have not taken out the SBU, and I think that's one of the more likely probabilities for targets because they took such bold credit for it. The presidential palace, the Verkhovna Rada, their parliament building, all those things have not been touched. I think the SBU was hit once minor, but no real damage and certainly no sustained activities. And then there are other things too, intelligence services, etc. There's a lot of targets that could be gone after inside Kiev within their command structure and their headquarters that they haven't done yet. All those things could happen as a result of this. And of course, from what we've seen anyway from this Oreshnik, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Patriot systems, THAAD, anything. We can't knock those things down. They're just coming in too fast, and they may even have maneuverable warheads, etc. And if that happens, folks, I mean, just probably, I think we can count on that something big is going to come. I think there's too much anger on the Russian side. There's been too many of them, even at the highest levels, thinking that they've been too patient. And then with this big kind of in-your-face strike here and something that will definitely hurt. Russia does have a big bomber fleet, but man, you can't lose, even if the lower number is right and it's 20 or 30 bombers and other military aircraft. That is a painful hit, one-day hit tally. It's big. But the question is, how much more can the Russian side take without amping things up and expanding their target set? And I think that's what we're going to end up seeing. We'll wait and see how it goes out there. Again, just to kind of recap here, there has been significant attacks by the Ukraine side into Russia. The two delegations are in Istanbul right now. There will be scheduled meetings tomorrow. A lot of people are going to be watching. President Putin is meeting with the security officials in the Kremlin as we speak. So far, no statements have been made. We will definitely keep you up to date on all of this. We really appreciate you joining with us on this special Sunday edition. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done that. It helps us out a lot. Also, to remind you, we're on podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict. Type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you'll find us waiting there for you. Thank you very much. And if anything else breaks overnight, we'll bring that to you. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow morning on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.